we're live on Twitch. We are live on YouTube. I think. Hey, internet. This is Nate. You can also call me Nathan. And welcome back to Deep Rock Galactic Survivor. We've been playing a couple days now. We're gonna play a little bit today, but I thought I'll hit 4 hours pretty quick here on the early access version of Deep Rock Galactic Survivor. And I thought it would be a good time to talk about my overall impressions of the game, my thoughts, and in general feedback on if for some reason the developers watch this video, what I would recommend to them in terms of further enhancing and expanding on the game. First off, if you're only watching this video and haven't watched the other gameplay videos, again, we are going to play a little bit, so it's not just going to be a pure impressions video / stream. But I am going to give some feedback. But so what is this game? This game is a swarm survivor. That's still my coined term for this genre, based on Vampire Survivors. Unlike other Survivors games, Deep Rock Galactic has a little bit more in terms of quests. It has this whole mining mechanic and some things that make it unique. But in general, it follows a similar pattern of killing enemies, taking the enemies' whatever they leave behind essence to level up. You select different skills. In this case, they are weapons. You level up those weapons to make them more powerful. You can have a certain amount of them. You can also unlock general stat upgrades, and all with the idea of trying to survive as long as possible. And in the case of Deep Rock Galactic Survivor, also trying to finish objectives. Also, hello Karina, hello Sparky Motive. So nothing too unique in terms of the overall style, apart from these kind of two main unique aspects of the game, which is one, having actual missions that you're doing. Each run is 5 missions in a row where you accomplish certain objectives leading up to a final boss fight, then escaping. That part's pretty unique, all the way up until like a final boss fight. And then the second being this whole mining and gathering aspect to the game. But apart from that, essentially it's a swarm survivor. So let's jump into a run, and I'll talk through a mix of things I like and some criticisms as we do it. I'm going to go with I have not played the drill here yet, so I feel like we should stick with something I actually know how to play. We're going to stick with the Scout now.
I'm going to keep it classic.
Find and eliminate the dreadnought. Let's talk about the first couple things. First off, aesthetics. Actually like the aesthetics of the game quite a lot. Most swarm survivors, in true Vampire Survivors fashion, utilize a very old school look by design. I would say this is not too far off the beaten path in terms of like the presentation, apart from everything just being a little bit more high res. We have a lot of 3D models. We have a lot of like flashier animations. So definitely a step up from a lot of the swarm survivors that I've played, but like, again, it's still kind of tried and true top-down view, enemies marching toward you, and it's not like incredible, but I think it's pretty good. It's like, I don't know, it's up in the top genre when it comes to just looks, top of the genre when it comes to just like looks and
I'm raring to try this out.
Where I think this one with this particular swarm survivor especially shines though is in the sound department. I think it's got some of like the crispiest, punchiest sound effects out of any swarm survivor. Feels like really nice. All the weapons have like very crunchy, impactful sounds, and the enemies all have like pretty distinct, interesting sounds associated with them. I don't know how much was lifted directly from Deep Rock Galactic, like the core game, but yeah, sounds super nice, and that definitely adds a lot to the presentation of the game, in addition to the very, very high def, if somewhat simplistic, visual presentation. But in general, I feel like that's pretty good. Music, pretty meh. It's like this general ambiance. There's not really much to it. But I would say that's not you apart from specifically Vampire Survivors. I think expecting like really strong music out of a Swarm Survivor is probably asking a lot, but it's fine. It's not distracting. It's not, again, it's not particularly amazing, but it's okay. So in terms of presentation, I would give this one, like if I were to grade it, somewhere in like the B plus A minus range. Decent graphics, good sound, decent enough music. I guess the last area we should talk about is the UI. I feel like is pretty good. Like even like these leveling up screens and stuff, it has a very, like, for me, the aesthetic is very similar to like XCOM, where you have these outlines of guns, you have this kind of, I don't know, like the style just has this XCOM feel to it. I don't know if I'm the only one feeling that. That's been my impression. I guess Deep Rock Galactic has very similar aesthetic. It's kind of like, yeah, space-ish theme to it. So, which I think is quite nice. I think it looks pretty good. It's definitely a step up from other Swarm Survivors, which use very oftentimes simplistic views for like their leveling up screens and their menu UI and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, but still, I would say in general, not the best, not the most amazing presentation of all the Swarm Survivors that I played, but one of the better ones for sure. Okay, so then let's get into like some of the core aspects of the Swarm Survivor genre and how this one holds up in contrast to some of the others. Let's talk about first character class diversity. It's a big part of a lot of Swarm Survivors, not all of them. You'll have your outliers that don't have a lot of character variety, but for the most part, it's a pretty strong staple of the series, is that you have a lot of different characters and they all feel relatively unique. I've only played 3 of the 4, so I've played the Scout, the Engineer, and the Gunner. I have not played the Driller, so keep in mind I've not played with all the characters. But in general, I would say there is some like moderate differentiation. In particular, the Engineer felt pretty unique compared to the other 2 classes. I would say the Scout and the Gunner felt pretty damn similar. I didn't feel like they were particularly unique from each other. Driller is great. Okay, we'll try the Driller sometime. Maybe if we have time during this video. But Engineer felt pretty distinct. The other 2 felt pretty darn similar. I expect the Driller probably feels a little bit more unique as well, similar to the Engineer. But I will say only having 3 or 4 different characters is pretty light compared to most other games in the genre. And that's not a requirement to have tons and tons and tons of characters, but it is, I would say, extremely common. And having 4 is like kind of, it's just okay. Especially if with 2 of them feel virtually the same. It's really like you have 3 characters. And again, this is assuming that the Driller feels particularly unique, which I expect, just based on my experience playing Deep Rock Galactic, that it probably will feel some. So in terms of characters, I would say not particularly amazing, but decent. The ones that you have are like decent. Then when it comes to like weapon and item differentiation, I kind of feel like this is where the game is the weakest. Yes, the Engineer did have some very unique types with like the, you know, the different turrets and the different drones and stuff, but generally what you're looking at is different guns, which in like an FPS can make something feel very unique. So like Deep Rock Galactic, the different weapon types can feel very unique, but in an auto shooter style game like this, I would say it doesn't feel particularly unique. Like, yes, I know that I technically have a shotgun, and I technically have a sniper rifle option, and I technically have machine guns, but generally they all kind of act the same, which is shoot enemies nearby. The engineer being the one character that has some like unique weapons, again with drones and stuff, but I've felt fairly unimpressed with the diversity of choice. Certainly have not felt like there's any strategic element towards picking like a shotgun versus a sniper rifle. I'm sure there is. I'm sure maybe at the higher difficulties that becomes slightly more important. But if I compare this with other games where the weapon choices are like extremely distinct and different, that for me was a little bit lacking. Where again, a lot of the weapons, a lot of the guns feel very, very samey. And what for me especially makes it a little bit less interesting is not only are the weapons somewhat samey, but the level ups are very, very, very uninspired. They are pure stats, very little unique to each weapon. Yes, there are specifically 3, you know, these overclocked do make them slightly more unique, but even the overclocking is shared amongst the different weapons. So I feel like you never really get the sense that like these weapons are particularly unique or interesting. And the level ups, you just typically pick the one that's the brightest color. Not always. Like I will often prioritize weapon levels because you get the bonus overclocking when you hit certain weapon thresholds. But generally I get this sense that like you just pick the rarest option, which to me is not super interesting. It's kind of in line with how OG Pathfinder Swarm Survivor was. I know that one's kind of improved a little bit since it first dropped, but yeah, the level ups in this game I find to be fairly weak. And so the core for me, the core Swarm Survivor like aspects, character diversity, build diversity, unique weapons, and interesting level choices, I feel like is where this game is letting me down the most. So from a Swarm Survivor perspective, I feel like the game is actually pretty weak in terms of gameplay. But unlike other Swarm Survivors, it does have more things going for it than just the Swarm Survivor aspect to it. So then you have to consider, what about the unique aspects that the game brings? You have missions that require you to move around the map. Like right now, I'm having to pick up these caps if I want to get extra gold and levels. There is drops that you can pick up. There are bosses that you have to fight. Let's take each of these kind of one aspect at a time. But first with like the missions. Well, I've talked about this before, but I think some of the best Swarm Survivors are ones that benefit from encouraging the player to move around the map regularly. This is definitely, out of all the ones that I played, this is one of the ones where you are going to be moving the most. One, because you need resources in order to utilize a lot of different mechanics in the game. So re-rolling uses resources, leveling up between missions uses resources. You're going to have this motivation to get as many resources, gold, and the nitra as possible. Similarly, there's meta upgrades, and those meta upgrades, unlike in a lot of games, require unique pickups and unique resources in order to level up. So there's going to be a lot of encouragement for constantly moving around the map, looking for things to mine and things to pick up, which I think is quite good. I think that makes up for some of, I would say, the lack of diversity, because you're constantly moving. So there are some like elements of moving around the map, when to mine, when to dodge, when to stand still, when to make the most of your environment. That's pretty unique in the genre. Not many have a lot of this like, hey, I'm gonna carve my own path, and if I get stuck, I can utilize the spaces around the map to get to a place where I can be safe. So I think in terms of like tactical gameplay, there isn't another game that has as strong of map movement as a core tactical gameplay piece, which I think is super, super interesting. I think it's the best part of this game is and I've talked about this before, not a lot of these auto range. Not a lot of these games have fantastic tactical gameplay. There are a few exceptions, like 20 Minutes Till Dawn, or some of these others where you have like dashes and where you actually are aiming and shooting and so on. This one has none of that, but it has a really interesting tactical gameplay in terms of when to mine, when to run, when to engage, when to hold, which I think is really, really, really fun. And as I said, it makes up for a lot of the lack of build diversity and the lack of strategic decision making when it comes to leveling up. Where those things are lacking, I feel like this game makes up for a lot. Okay, so that's one aspect, is the missions and like the movements and that part of the tactical game. The next is the actual boss fights themselves. Do I like Soulstone Survivors? I do. I do. There's things I don't like about it, but in general, I think it's a pretty good Swarm Survivor. Certainly one of the most popular ones, in addition to being pretty strong. But yeah, so let's talk about like the actual boss fights and the enemy fights. I feel like this was a huge missed opportunity in this game. Having played not a ton, but a little bit of Deep Rock Galactic, I think there could have been a little bit more variety in how you take on enemies. Most enemies, including most bosses, are the standard run right at you. Whereas I felt like when I was playing Deep Rock Galactic, they actually were a little bit more strategic, and the AI was a little bit more interesting than just always run towards you. So I'm hoping that that's one of the things that they improve over time, is uniqueness in enemy types, uniqueness in bosses. Especially the kind of final bosses, it's the same on every single map. All the enemies are the same on every single map. There's not like a ton of variety. I think maybe, what, 8 or 9 enemy types, boss versions of all those enemies, and then the big boss. Oh, I just totally missed the fact I had to get on the drop pod because I was talking for some. So I think enemy variety could definitely be improved, and I feel like of all of my criticisms, it's the one that's probably the easiest to solve. But I find enemy variety to be very, very weak, especially considering where this game is coming from. The source material for this game, I feel like, does that already better, and they could just lean in to making the enemies a lot more unique feeling than they do right now. Like, there's not a lot of and this was the thing, like Deep Rock Galactic has a lot of like, holy shit, surprise enemies. The Survivors doesn't have any of that feeling. So we talked about tactical gameplay, we talked about oh, let's talk about levels. So there are 3 different levels to the game, and each level does add layers to the previous one. The Crystalline Caverns being the most kind of bare bones, where you have places to mine and you have places where you can walk. Magma Core adds places that damage you when you walk around. Hollow Bow, I don't know. It adds areas where you can't walk through, but largely they feel the same. Honestly, like, I don't know of a good Swarm Survivor where every level felt so unique and so different that I was like super hyped about it. So I mean, I can't criticize it too much because it's a pretty big staple of the genre that the levels all typically feel pretty similar. I mean, even Vampire Survivors, the first few levels feel very samey. Yes, it starts to branch out a little bit. It's Bow. Okay, good. Thank you, Quietus Ghost. But yeah, I did say I do think again here there could have been a little bit more uniqueness, but it's okay. It's on par for the genre. There's only 3 right now. I assume there will be a lot more by the end of early access. I think that'd be a huge disappointment if they weren't. I don't like having this many difficulty levels on a single map. This is actually why I stopped playing Army of Ruin a long time ago, is I felt like 5+ difficulties on the same map is not interesting. I would say maximum like 3 is interesting for me. So like I'm of two minds. I think either you do something like Slay the Spire, where there's not really one map, there's like one large let's say sequence of maps. I think that can be quite good, and then you have like different levels going, and you can do that up to like 20, like Monster Train's like that. Like, I don't care if it's one single sequence, but then you're ramping the difficulty. I don't mind that. If there's multiple levels, I think having multiple levels, each with a massive amount of difficulty, is not interesting. There's zero chance that I will play through all 5 difficulty modes on every single map, because again, I don't find that super interesting. If you think about Vampire Survivors, there's basically like 3 difficulty modes. You can kind of blend them, but yeah. Okay, so in terms of map variety and level variety, it's fine, not great. And
so shiny here.
As well, I don't really like difficulties where it's very like vague. Like, what's the difference between Hazard 1 and Hazard 2? I have no idea. What's the difference between Hazard 5 and Hazard 4? Again, no idea. I prefer to kind of have that, like Brotato actually does that pretty well, where it explains at every single difficulty how it's altering the game. I don't like this lack of transparency. So, okay, so then let me like kind of try to compile my thoughts overall. I think the game is in this very precarious position where, as a Swarm Survivor, and the core elements of the Swarm Survivor are pretty weak, it's being held up by really strong visual presentation, coupled with even stronger sound design, and a tactical element of gameplay that makes it feel unique and different. However, I don't think it has a lot of longevity as a game you're going to play for more than like 10, 15, maybe 20 hours. I certainly do not see myself investing an insane amount of time in this game like I have with some other Swarm Survivors, because the actual core gameplay loop, the strategic element, is right now its very weakest. And so replayability for me, if I think about like why I played so much Vampire Survivors, why I played a lot of Brotato, why I played a lot of Soulstone Survivors or others, there are 2 main reasons to continue to play these games when they, at their core, are pretty simple. One is a massive amount of unique styles to play, because you have different characters, different maps, different builds you can do, or the strategic decision making is so interesting and varied, the variety in that aspect is so strong that I'm willing to continue jumping back in to try different strategies. This currently does not have either as a strong suit. You have 4 characters, 2 of which feel essentially the same, with weapon decision making being, again, extremely weak. So if I compare this with, for example, with another game that also has strong tactical gameplay, so like 20 Minutes Till Dawn, that game actually has a lot of strategic decision making. Those decisions are few and they are interesting. Each level up changes the way that you're going to play and affects your future decisions. I don't get that sense at all here. So if I were to recommend something, again, developers, if you are listening, want to hear my opinion, I think the number one thing that you can do to make this game more interesting is to improve the quality of the leveling up and decision making. Have the weapons have unique level ups that make them different from each other. So for example, and I just do this because I've played like a million of these games. You have a shotgun. What are classic upgrades to a shotgun? Piercing, number of bullets, damage of the bullets, emphasize, or reload speed, right? Really zone in on like what makes a shotgun interesting. I can reload quickly and go boom, boom with big blasts. That's not really reinforced here. The blasts don't change no matter how much I level it up. I have like a standard, like regular gun. What should that do? Maybe more piercing, adding elemental damage to it, I think could be quite interesting. You have a gun that kind of shoots in all directions. Make that even more. So you start off with 4 bullets, then you get 6 bullets, then you get 10 bullets, and it becomes a giant spread that hits in all directions. You have an electricity gun. Increase the number of times it chains off of enemies. Increase the damage of each of the chains as it goes out. Like, there's a lot of stuff that you can do to make those leveling up decisions a lot more interesting and impactful, versus it increases the damage, it increases the fire rate, it increases the reload speed. That would be my number one feedback. It's the same feedback I gave to the developers of Pathfinder, is make the strategic decisions more interesting, and it's going to make replayability that much better. Make each weapon feel unique, so that if I can only pick 4, I'm going to try different combinations that feed off of each other. This is, again, where Vampire Survivors both excels and fails, which is kind of ironic. There's so many things in Vampire Survivors that you're always thinking of different combinations, and sometimes those combinations synergize extremely well, sometimes they're anti-synergistic, but that's what makes it so interesting. There's so many things you can do that you're constantly wanting to try different strategies. Brotato's pretty similar in that regard as well. There's so many choices you can make that you want to try different things. Again, something like 20 Minutes Till Dawn is less that way. There's not so many things, but there's not as many decisions, and they're all extremely impactful. You could go either way with this game. You could either have so many interesting and unique things, and again, unique being the key word, not guns that feel relatively similar, but one shoots a little bit faster and one hits a little bit harder. That's not interesting. But a shotgun that feels like a shotgun and gets more shotgunny the more you've upgraded the shotgun, versus an assault rifle that feels more assault riflery as you level up the assault rifle, and there's a very distinct feel and use case for both. That's interesting. Again, 2 guns that the only difference is one shoots fewer bullets and reloads more often, and one it just doesn't seem that interesting. So that's my biggest criticism, and my biggest recommendation is make that part more interesting. The rest of it's actually really solid. So now you couple better decision making with a foundation in tactical gameplay that is way more interesting than a lot of other games, and I think you have one of the best of the genre. I don't even think, even with like the enemy variety being pretty simple, I mean, no one's talking about Vampire Survivors being like the best in terms of enemy AI. You think having guns is basically your only type of weapon limits things? I don't agree with that. I think you can make the guns feel better if you really, really, really zoom in on what that gun does that's unique and make it more interesting. I agree that it's cool, you can have the creative space to do everything, but did I see the news? I don't know what the news is. What news? You're coming at me with big news. I think you can still make them feel very unique. Nobody's playing Halo and criticizing that the pistol feels too much like an assault rifle. The hitboxes are very fair. I agree with that. I think the game feels great. It's just a game that feels great but feels samey is not a game I'm gonna play forever. So that's my number one criticism. Oh yeah, the Elden Ring trailer. Yeah, I saw that. There you go. And with that, you guys are probably going to be pissed off because this is a stream. But that's what I wanted to cover today. Was the game, my thoughts, my feelings. We're going to keep it relatively tight. People that are viewing can get the impressions and go already. Well, you know what? Let's do that. So Joe, as you said, there's a roadmap for the game. Let's review the roadmap and see if they follow my recommendations or if they're going way out in left field. Let's look at this. So we have the road ahead. More weapons, more biomes, more artifacts. And more. So that's what I'm seeing. Where are you seeing more roadmap? I'm not seeing more roadmap beyond just that they're going to have more stuff. Keep in mind, these are not the same developers. The roadmap just says it's going to have more stuff. That's it. More weapons, more biomes, more artifacts. That's what it says. Yeah, it's a completely different developer. So it's the what's the word for it? Not the developer, but the people that fund the game. I can't think of what that's called. The publisher. The publisher is the same, but it's a spin-off done by another studio. Anyway, yeah, so again, there's a lot to like. I think it's great if you want to like dive in and play for like 10 to 20 hours. I think you'll enjoy those 10 to 20 hours. And if you're like me, at about the 10-hour mark, it's going to start to feel a little bit samey, which is already how I'm feeling now, sitting again at about 4.5 hours into the game. So that's my overall impressions. Let me know what you guys think. And with that, this has been Nate, and I will see you guys next time. See you later.